Hans Christian Andersen was a famous Danish book author, renowned for his fairytale volumes, with each book telling several different classic tales, in a way that would directly speak and amuse children, being quick-witty, direct to the point and funny, as well as being written more from the child's point of view, although he faced very harsh criticism for this at the time, as adult readers believed that children's stories should have the same language as adult novels, as a way for children to learn to speak properly. Andersen's stories would as well be a soft parody of children's books at the time. The stories would be self-aware for when the tales would begin and end. Take the beginning of The Snow Queen, after a very comprehensible prologue. Alright, now let's begin. When we reach the end of the story, we will know more than we know now. For that, it was an evil troll. Why yes, of course we would naturally learn more about the story as we go along. This was Andersen clearly being tongue-in-cheek for the time. The tongue of his language would later on influence Lewis Carroll in his Alice in Wonderland books, which many have regarded the first true children's novel, while Hans Christian Andersen did write stories that directly appealed to adults. There is no doubt that he had a wonderful command to speaking directly to children, but ever since his childhood, he felt quite isolated from other people and was greatly lonely. He could be a very hard character to get along with. One time, travelling to England, he stayed with the family of Charles Dickens, although he partially overstayed his welcome. When he left, Dickens wrote on the mirror of the guest room, "Hans Andersen slept in this room for 5 weeks, which seemed to the family ages." Andersen as well was a hopeless romantic. An infamous woman in his life was an opera singer, Jenny Lind. In 1844, he wished to propose a marriage, but being immensely nervous, he formatted the question in a letter. She replied back in the same fashion. "Farewell, God bless and protect my brother, is the sincere wish of his affectionate sister, Jenny." He didn't take the letter very well. The way he would always cope trying to rationalise his emotions was through writing. According to Carol Rosen, Hans Andersen would use Jenny Lind as an influence, being the title character in one of his most famous children's stories, The Snow Queen. If you like what you see, then be sure to subscribe. You can now support Scribbles to Screen on Patreon, where some of my generous viewers got to see this video nearly 2 weeks in advance. Be sure to spread the word to get some missing media found.
We'll go and see the cracks again someday.
By the late 20s to the early 30s, Walt Disney was producing innovative and experimental cartoons, featuring synchronized sound, and from 1932 the majority of his pictures were photographed in Technicolor, with the new color process still being several years shy of being broadly used in Hollywood feature films. But all of these technical achievements came with a heavy price tag, and it was slowly becoming harder and harder for the studio to make back a profit. But Disney saw one route to go down to bring back financial rewards for the company: breaking into feature films, announcing his plans to make an animated movie in 1934, which would be his adaptation of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Up until that point, there had yet to have been a feature animation in Hollywood, let alone America, especially an animated movie that used cel animation, an insanely costly and time-consuming method. Also, the genre of the movie was going to be a fairytale fantasy, which was still an uncharted genre in Hollywood. The only mainstream fantasy Hollywood movie prior to Snow White was Paramount's 1933 Alice in Wonderland. It failed to make back its budget, and it received harsh reviews. Some of the reviews even question if a fantasy story was fully achievable to create on film. The press and film industry referred to Disney's project as Disney's Folly. Regardless of the onlookers, the studio perceived forwards. Production only just wrapped up in November of 1937, a month before its release. Snow White would go on to be a tremendous success for the studio, being the highest grossing movie of all time, just before it was surpassed by Gone with the Wind only about 2 years later. Snow White would be a landmark in cinema history, as it not only opened the door for more animated features to come, but demonstrated that a fantasy feature film was possible. Very shortly after the success of Snow White, the studio got to work in pre-production of its next following features, and Walt was seeking out new Fairytale ideas. He sent out his good man, Mark Davis, to Scandinavia for research and to find that next project. Upon returning to America, he presented to Walt the stories of Hans Christian Andersen. The multitude of tales could offer short films or even a feature. Curiously, in 1939, The Snow Queen was given a production number 1092. Although a lot of the Hans Christian Andersen stories from Disney during this time never got past early development. Aside from a short film based on the Ugly Duckling story, over the years other Andersen stories, such as The Little Mermaid, was rediscovered that had made it within early stages of concept design, but nothing substantial has been rediscovered from the Snow Queen project. No artwork or script dating back to the 30s. It's not even known if it was intended to be a feature film or a short movie. As it currently stands, only the production number offers the evidence that the Walt Disney was working on his rendition of the Snow Queen. During the early 1940s, the Disney studio were really struggling to break even on their pictures. And of course, during the time of World War II, the European market was completely dissolved. The disappointing box office returns for 1942's Bambi proved to be the straw that broke the camel's back. For the next 8 years, there wouldn't be another narrative-based animated film. Instead, the following feature films during this time were very budgeted, comprising of package films, with several short animated stories stringed together, and experimenting with live-action movies. Song of the South being a hybrid of live-action and animation, and Disney's Treasure Island nearly followed the same suit, of having animated segments in its plot, but this was completely dropped in favour for an entirely live-action movie.
Walt Disney with his first all-live action feature, Treasure Island.
And natural world documentaries, such as the first of them, Seal Island. As Walt Disney was expanding his movie horizon, it nearly led to a collaboration with Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer. Back in the late 30s with the success of Snow White, it inspired MGM to proceed forward with a fantasy story. The result was The Wizard of Oz. It certainly seemed poetic, both companies, being responsible for two of the most important movies of Hollywood history, would collaborate on a project. Since all the way back in 1936, Goldwyn had an idea to make an autobiography of Hans Christian Andersen, that this would be a hybrid animation film, with MGM supplying the live-action portions, and then Walt Disney Studios could make animated shorts as Andersen tells these tales in the film. Even though it was pitched as an autobiography, the intention was to make it more of a whimsical, light-hearted musical that's more inspired of Andersen's life rather than trying to tell any kind of truth. This eventual Andersen movie would star Danny Kaye, discovered by Goldwyn's wife, Frances Howard, during a Broadway show in New York. When he was invited to Hollywood for a screen test, the MGM higher-ups didn't find him a particularly handsome or attractive chap, finding his nose a bit wonky, but they were still willing to give him a contract, under the understanding if they could dye his natural brunette hair into a rich strawberry blonde. The songs were created by Frank Loesser. Since the movie's release, they've been regularly available to obtain. But curiously, the pre-recordings used on screen have yet to have been released. That's been the working track and audio from the cast.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Which is very unusual for an MGM title, as they've been quite recently added in albums as part of a bonus feature. The film was released in the spring of 1952 to critical acclaim. Although it was a controversial title in Denmark, the Danes were not particularly flattered on the Hollywood reimagining, and especially some of the cultural mistakes, such as calling the capital of Denmark Copenhagen with a German pronunciation. The Germans occupied Denmark during World War II, and of course the film only being released less than a decade later after the collapse of the Nazi Empire, it was something that the Danes were particularly not happy with. The actual pronunciation is Copenhagen. The final movie was not a collaboration with Walt Disney, as the deal ultimately fell through for unknown reasons. There were several drafts made while Walt Disney was involved during the early 40s, but as of today it's not known as to what exactly happened to them. The final Anderson stories that were finalized to be featured in the film were The Ugly Duckling, Thumbelina, The Emperor's New Clothes, and The Little Mermaid, being featured in the musical aspect rather than the animation visuals, with the Snow Queen story yet again failing to see through. And it seems after a mainstream tribute to Hans Christian Andersen that Hollywood for a little while would stray away from his stories. Within the States, the production of the Snow Queen may have been stagnant, but that wasn't the same for in Russia. You see, for a little bit of historical context, in Hans Christian Andersen's lifetime, his stories were particularly beloved by the Danish royal family, with King Christian IX invited him over to the Yellow Palace to entertain the royal children, particularly becoming friendly with Princess Doma, later to be known as Maria Feodorovna. She was an arranged marriage to the Romanov family Alexander III of Russia, and afterwards it led to a lot of Danish influences into the country, particularly in our case, Danish literature, as Hans Christian Andersen became more widely known amongst the people. Before we proceed forwards, I apologise if I butcher any of these Russian names. Sorry, Russian's not my first language. Russian Animation Studio saw its mold film were interested in adapting the Snow Queen for a feature movie after the international success of their short movie, The Golden Antelope. This project was the first true adaptation of Hans Christian Andersen's The Snow Queen. Legendary Russian animator Leonid Schwartzman, who has had well over 70 plus credits with the studio, was in charge of the art direction for the picture, most prominently with the character designs. And Alexander Vinokurov was responsible for creating the look of the landscapes. From the natural world to the Ice Queen's palace, the crew would have loved to have gone to Denmark, Copenhagen, to get a real sense for the environment and inspiration to incorporate for the film. But of course, being at the time of the Cold War with the Soviets ruling over Russia and being immensely strict on Western influences, travelling around the world globally was not a realistic possibility. The crew instead conducted their research within the Baltic states due to the historical context that the streets resemble Scandinavian architecture. Pre-production began in the fall of 1955 and storyboards were completed by the early summer of 1956. From there, it took about a year and a half to complete the animation, with a lot of it being achieved by the rotoscope technique, where you photograph live-action actors, and then from there you trace their movements. The screenwriters Nikolai Edman and Gorgy Gedner took careful care into faithfully translating it for a Russian audience, although removing much of the original Christian aspect of the story. But the biggest scene that the film removed out was the lengthy prologue, with the devil carrying the magic mirror up to heaven, before shattering into millions of pieces. They rechanged the magic mirror to be more associated with the actual Snow Queen. However, the devil and the mirror were proposed in the early stages of the story, and there was even concept art drawn up. This artwork was made available in the exhibit of the Snow Queen's 55th anniversary, Cold and Beauty, as well as an illustrated book featuring 50 images of concept art from the movie, although from what I can find, none of it seems to be available online. Some of the employees would love to get up to a bit of mischievous pranking. Liv Milchin, who had spent the last several days painting a panorama image for the movie. Just as the painting was nearing completion, the two men, Roman Kachanov and Zhenya Mekhanov, placed a transparent celluloid on top of the painting and spilled on top some black ink, looking like the painting was spoiled. When Milchin came in the morning, he was nearly ready to panic. Thankfully, he handled the joke pretty well. In 1959, 2 years after the movie's original release in Russia, Universal bought the distribution rights for America and Canada for about $30,000. They purchased the film after seeing the marketing potential from that year's Sleeping Beauty to compete in that Disney family market. Although ironically, they would have to persuade both Disney and Samuel Goldwyn to withhold the exclusive title rights from the MPAA. This would become the first Soviet movie distributed in America. They prepared an English translation and a 6-minute live-action introduction by Art Linkletter, released on November 20th of that year. And then afterwards the film would be frequently shown on television, usually around about the holiday season, with Disney animated films still being exclusive during this time to only theatrical re-releases, hardly ever broadcasting on television. The Snow Queen would be the most frequently accessible animated film for many people growing up, making it quite a fondly cult favourite. It earned several more English redubs over the years. The film was especially very popular in Japan. It was particularly enjoyed by Toei Animated Studios, as it would be privately screened there. A young animator who hated his job and was nearly ready to quit saw the film and was greatly inspired by it, convincing himself to stay within the industry. This man was Hayao Miyazaki. Despite being quite an in-demand title, the various prints that have been made available have been within substantially poor quality. It only recently earned a HD restoration in 2020, and much of the movie's original artwork went under preservation at the same time. While we never got a Hollywood adaptation of the Snow Queen from the Golden and Silver Age, this movie will likely be the closest we'll ever get to that rendition of the Snow Queen, capturing that Walt Disney and MGM touch of sparking the child within all of us. By the 50s to the 60s, Walt Disney had expanded his horizon from animated features, live-action movies, TV shows, and the most daring of them all, theme park attractions. And when Disney passed during the mid-60s, and the animated films became far and far less frequent, the company virtually survived thanks to the theme park attractions. The animator Mark Davis had migrated his position to help the Disney theme park engineers, lending his hand on several attractions, such as the Jungle Cruise, the Enchanted Tiki Room, Great Moments with Mr. Lincoln, and Pirates of the Caribbean. At least for the first 20 years of Disneyland's existence, he played a part of adding in his little touches, and naturally being the man that brought the Snow Queen to the studio. He was in the development of making an unmade Disney ride, titled the Enchanted Snow Palace, a ride that would have been set and built indoors, with a controlled cooling system, with the park based in the hot Californian state. A ride that was essentially a cooling machine would have been a grateful novelty for many of the sweaty park guests. The ride would have included a trio of 3 little snowballs, a penguin alongside a very small abominable snowman, a group of penguin musicians called the South Pole Pops doing their rendition of the Nutcracker, various snow animals skating along the ice and sliding down it. But then the guests would have been confronted by a giant snow monster. Thankfully they were able to escape, and just at the very end they meet the Snow Queen. The attraction would have had an original soundtrack provided by Disney theme park regular Buddy Baker. The attraction was in early development during the late 1970s, but it never got past the concept stage. By the 80s, Disney was well established for being a company empire, having so many assets to its name that they theoretically didn't really need to continue making animated features. And just as the popularity of the animated movies were running dry, there was a real possibility of the Disney company completely dissolving that branch off. But being the company's original bread and butter, it was such an important asset of their legacy that they would revitalize that division, offsetting the goal of making one new animated film a year. But the most important thing they did away with was questioning as to what Walt Disney would do. This hesitation of breaking the Disney mold was harming their expansion and extension of being so reluctant of trying something different. It was an important necessity to take risk, to push the envelope of what Disney animation could really do. Even though they began building momentum with Oliver and Company, it wasn't until the release of an abandoned Disney project that would truly launch Disney animation into a new renaissance. That film was based on Hans Christian Andersen, The Little Mermaid. Within the peak of the Disney Renaissance, the Snow Queen yet again went back into production. During the making of Mulan, the voice of Yao, Harvey Fierstein pitched his own idea for a Snow Queen film to Disney, although the company declined his idea of the film. Dick Zombag, who directed Meet the Robinsons and Walt, had his hands on developing the project, and eventual Tangled director Glenn Keane was in charge for quite a substantial amount of time of steering the boat. The aim was to try and stick quite faithfully to the original source material, but the biggest problem that the crew kept on having with the story was that it just seemingly wasn't translating well to a film medium. The Snow Queen, as written in the original fairy tale, didn't really have any set motivation, no real clear goal. She certainly seems villainous in the story, but she's absent towards the end of the fairy tale, so there's no real conclusion with her character. As faithful as the original Russian version may have been, it took some creative liberties near to the very end to make it feel ever more satisfying. As a movie-going experience, Glenn Keane, feeling like that he was getting nowhere with the story, stepped away from the project. In limbo, the movie in 2002 was seemingly abandoned. At a time where the Disney animated films were losing their steam in popularity, it was well and truly the end of a golden era for Disney. But as for the Snow Queen's movie, it was far from being all over. The project was picked up yet again in 2003 to make it CGI, with Pixar supplying the animation. This was of course just prior to Disney and Pixar splitting off, with the public meltdown, although the project was never officially confirmed to be cancelled, so many Disney fans were hopefully optimistic. Very little information about this incarnation of the Snow Queen has emerged, although from what information has surfaced, the story would have majorly departed from the original Hans Andersen fairy tale. The story would have been about an unkindly Snow Queen who's trying to find a suitor to marry, who, since she doesn't like any of them, she freezes them all, until one man comes along and melts her frozen heart. The Snow Queen would have been accompanied by a butler snowman, and a polar bear and penguin would have been the sidekicks. Song composer Alan Menken was developing a Snow Queen stage musical for Tokyo Disneyland based on this rendition of the movie, although just as the film, the stage show never truly materialized. In September of 2005, the Kaufman Center's Merkin Hall in New York City did a special tribute to Alan Menken, featuring many of his songs sung by Broadway singers. Actor Brian Darcy James did a cover of an unreleased song called Love Can't Be Denied, which was originally developed for the Snow Queen. As of 2021, this is the only song from 2003's The Snow Queen that has emerged online. In October of 2008, animator Don Hahn released his concept art of the Snow Queen while he was on board in 2003. By the 2000s, Disney had taken a back seat from fairy tale stories in their animated movies, and due to a rival studio success with a certain green CGI mascot, and the depleting success of 2D animation, hand-drawn movies were being faded out in the Hollywood landscape. In 2006, new CEO of Disney, Bob Iger, made amends with Pixar, purchasing the company for $7 billion, to aid Disney's position of the animation department, with John Lasseter becoming Chief Creative Officer of both Pixar and Disney. In this position, John Lasseter made some major revelations for Disney animation, discontinuing the direct-to-video Disney animation sequels, and had a keen interest in not only bringing back 2D animation, but Disney's classic fairy tale roots. The idea was Disney Animation would release a CGI movie every 2 years, and a hand-drawn movie every other year, with The Princess and the Frog being their first hand-drawn return. Then the following year, the CGI movie Rapunzel, the 2D movie Winnie the Pooh, after that the CGI Wreck-It Ralph, and then in 2013, the return of 2D animation with the Snow Queen, with the plans being announced in 2009 at D23 Expo, with development looking pretty promising, as concept design was shown at the exhibit. But their ideal animation plans didn't go accordingly, as when Princess and the Frog was released, it was successful, but not quite at the peak that the company was really hoping for. This may have been down because it was released very close to James Cameron's Avatar, and having the word princess in the title would have made audiences suspect that this was only intended for a younger female audience. It was decided to give following feature films a gender-neutral title, such as Rapunzel was changed to Tangled, as a way for viewers to not quickly dismiss their movies. That, and only about 3 months later after the Snow Queen was announced, it seemed like the project was cancelled, as it was announced that Tangled was the last fairy tale film for the foreseeable future. But that wouldn't last for very long, In 2011, the project was once again picked back up and was given a locked release date of Thanksgiving of 2013. Furthermore, with the unfortunate box office disappointment of Winnie the Pooh, where despite its budget only being $30 million, it failed into recouping its cost. Because of this, Winnie the Pooh played a factor into Disney discontinuing their hand-drawn features. Furthermore, with Tangled making $500 million at the box office, it prompted Disney to make the Snow Queen a CGI movie, and to change its title into Frozen instead. The directors were Chris Buck, who had just formally directed the Sony movie Surf's Up, and Jennifer Lee, just fresh out of working on Wreck-It Ralph. The original plot of the film was about Anna, who was a peasant, travelling to meet the Snow Queen to freeze her broken heart. During the development, they were struggling to find the emotional core heart of the film, especially trying to make the Snow Queen come from a place of understanding, and also trying to find the level of drama. Like, what does Anna and the Snow Queen have to do with one another? During a creative meeting, where the crew was spontaneously coming up with ideas on the spot, somebody made the suggestion of making Anna and the Snow Queen sisters. And that was it. From there, everything began to click. It gave the movie the added layers that it needed. The Snow Queen Elsa was still meant to be the villain of the whole film. The songwriters of the film, real-life husband and wife, Kristen and Robert Lopez, were trying to write a villainous song for Elsa to sing when she's finally free of exploring her powers. It was when Robert was just experimenting with the keys, on the spot conjuring up a light-hearted key note, that the couple springed upon the tone of the whole song. The song they wrote, Let It Go, wasn't villainous, but whimsical, gentle, building up, a song about accepting yourself. After showing the crew the demo, it was at this point that they decided that Elsa didn't need to be a villain, but a misunderstood character. The whole first act was rewritten to accommodate for this character change. But now having to write an entirely new movie, they only had 15 months before release. Time was of the essence. The film was kept very close to the studio's chest before release. The first teaser of the movie, released less than a year before the movie came out, was not really a trailer and more like a mini short film, with Olaf and the reindeer Sven, of a scene that was only vaguely inspired from one interaction that was seen in the final movie. The first official look in the form of a trailer was not seen until October, although during the summer of 2013, a full scene with Kristoff and Anna escaping the ice monster was leaked online. The scene had ever slight differences compared to the one that was seen in the final movie. Different animation models.
He's coming! Okay, what if we fall?
And dialogue that indicated that Anna was a completely different character.
1,
No.
2.
No way. No, I'm not going.
1,
You tell me when. I'm ready to go.
2.
I was born ready. Yes.
Calm down.
And at the end of the clip, a completely absent scene of Elsa using her ice powers in a seemingly dastardly way. A song that very nearly didn't make it into the final cut was Do You Want to Build a Snowman? There was a lot of back and forth contentment if it should be in the final cut, but just as production was within the witching hour of release, the song was finalised to be kept into the picture. 25 original songs were written, but only 8 made it in. 7 of the scrapped songs were included on the film's soundtrack release. While it may have taken Disney 70 plus years to finally see through their rendition of the Snow Queen, Frozen would become one of the most successful franchises from the Disney animation canon. So if you ask me, not a bad trade-off. Frozen certainly spoke to a lot of people when it was released. And if I had to be honest, when I was a wee little scribbler lad, I was a Frozen fanatic when I first saw this in the theatres. I was most intrigued and really excited for it upon release. The lack of info, trailers, only purely going on the leaks. For me, Frozen came out when I was transitioning from a kid to a young adult. That last Disney film that sincerely resonates with me on that kid nostalgic level. The film really touched upon me. At the time, I saw myself and latched onto Elsa quite a bit, helping me through those tough times. And had a small crush, but that's beside the point. Buying the Blu-ray, I can recall being quite disappointed on how surface level the bonus features were. I really wanted to know the in-depth 70 plus year history. Of course, since then there has been so much more revealed about the making of Frozen, but I'm still mighty curious on what the unmade Snow Queen projects may have been like. Ah well, looks like in terms of documentaries, my video will have to do for now.